Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for attending Gitlab's session this morning. We will be covering product tiers and maturity levels, and we're pleased to introduce Dan Gordon, our product marketing manager, who will be taking the presentation from here. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A box listed at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be happy to address those questions at the end of the session. Thank you again. Would like to turn it over to Dan now.
Great. Thank you very much, Vivian, for the intro. Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you, partners, for being here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And like she said, I'm Dan Gordon, and looking forward to taking you through this. We're going to talk about our product tiers and maturity, so let's get going. So the first thing we want to talk about, let's cover why, right? What was the goal here when we talk about pricing tiers? And what we were looking to do was to figure out a framework that helps to position the different layers of product, the different prices for the customers. We realized that there was some challenge with what we were using in the past, and we looked at it and said it's important for us to have a clear indication with our tiered framework that helps customers to understand what's the right tier for them. That helps you to understand what's the right tier for a customer, and make that more easy, less obtuse to figure out. It's also important that we're able to optimize for revenue when we're looking at the pricing model. We've had complex pricing models. You can certainly, other companies have a complex pricing model where you can custom shape it to exactly the use case of the customer, but that is kind of messy. It's hard for the customer to understand what they are buying, which is not something we want to have. It's hard for the seller to understand what they're selling if it's a complex pricing model. So we really strive for simplicity because we believe that with that, it's easier to understand for everyone and we can move faster throughout the sale. It's also important that we're basing these tiers on what we end up using on value to the customer. So not kind of just a bucket of features that we kind of haphazardly threw in there, decided this looks good there, this looks good there, but that there's a logic behind those tier choices. This is also valuable for our product team in guiding them in the future what features make sense where. So with those notions in mind, with that goal in mind, and additionally that this is something we pick that grows with us and that we can evolve as we evolve the product, we sought out to figure out what is the right way to do it. We looked at what we'd done in the past. We'd had it based on size. So if you were starter, for example, if you had a company that was less than 100 users, if you were up to and less than 1,000, it was premium, greater was ultimate. This doesn't really work great because it's difficult to decide for features what group it needs to go in. So if I'm, for example, a large organization, do I care about static analysis security or security scanning? If I'm a startup, do I? I could be either, and it could be important for me to get my security scanning in early, for example. So only size as a factor makes it kind of tough to figure out where features go. And then in addition, the tiers have become kind of undifferentiated because of that. So value-based. So where we ended up as we looked at this, and the words we kept coming back to kept telling us maturity, because it was about, as we sorted through ways to cut this and ways to look at a customer, there's one stream throughout all was maturity. That made sense. Now, it's not maturity of the organization, but maturity of the organization in their process towards becoming digitalized and adopting advanced development practices. So let's take a second here and talk about what is a maturity model. So maturity models, I'm sure you've heard of, but they basically talk about levels of advancement. The value of a maturity model surely is that you know what's ahead of you and what the next step is and what you need to do to get to that next step. Now, Martin Fowler of software fame has great blogs about lots of things. There's a link down there in the slide deck. You can explore more for him. And these slides will be available in the Reseller channel, so you can get to those. He quotes very well that any maturity model, like any model, is a simplification. And that's the key to keep in mind here. The simplification is valuable, hopefully, but we know it's wrong. So keep that in mind. It's never going to be 100% or it would be the real thing, but it helps guide us in the right direction. So this is the maturity model that we are proposing, that we're working with. This is a simplified maturity model, 3 steps, not 5. And it's a maturity model of an organization's maturity as they move through adopting the software delivery, advanced software delivery practice. So normally from left to right, this is listed here from top to bottom: adopting, scaling, optimizing. So these are the 3 stages. When an organization starts adopting software delivery practices, more advanced modern software delivery practices, first they start by focusing on the core software development. This is the adopting phase, number 1. They look at how do they build automatically. They look at how do they test automatically. They look at even more fundamental things like source code management. How do we keep our source managed and controlled and know where it is and backed up and all of this. And so this is kind of the beginning of adopting modern software development practices. As they mature and they get that more under their control, they start to look to scale. So after automating their tests and their builds and being able to get a consistent output from development, they start looking at how do we get this further down the path? How do we deliver this to the next step, eventually to the customer? So they start looking at deployment capabilities. And they start also extending out and scaling out the practices that they've already achieved in the adopting phase. So more organizations start adopting continuous integration, build practices and test practices. So scaling is not necessarily just the number of people. Scaling can be in terms of the amount of code, for example, that they're now using these new practices with. Scaling can be the frequency of which they are delivering new code. But the point is that they have achieved a level of automation in their delivery from development, and they're scaling out how much they're doing it and how far it's going with respect to delivery to the customer. And then optimizing is when an organization is able to effectively create the software and deliver it to the customer, and they can do that consistently. But now they're looking to optimize, maximize their return on investment for all of this DevOps work. So optimizing is looking at the end-to-end process, looking for feedback across all of it, and finding the areas, looking at the value stream and finding the areas where they can tighten and optimize the process, leveraging feedback, looking at constraints and eliminating those constraints in the system. And oftentimes one of those constraints, a big one, is security and security testing. And so this is also an area of optimization. How do we better make sure that we are moving fast and delivering software, but we want to make sure it's secure software as well. And that oftentimes has been a constraint. So those stages, of course, naturally align to our tiers, our product tiers. Adopting is starter, scaling is premium, and optimizing is ultimate. So a way to think about starter, for example, is if the customer you're talking to is using Subversion or other legacy products, they're not even on Git, or maybe they're on Git, but they're not auto building yet. Right? This is an organization that's still kind of getting their legs, their sea legs. They're still figuring out how to automate their process and how to handle their code. So it doesn't make sense to sell them Ultimate, where they're going to have advanced security scanning and the ability to scale out to, globally, if they're still working on how do we make sure that our code is secure, or is controlled, and how do we make sure that we automate the process and test it properly, right? And so this is where organizations would land in starter if they're in the adopting phase. If they're starting with something like not Git or some legacy tool. Starter is named very aptly. It's not meant to be a perpetual plan. We don't want our customers to stay in starter for all stages of delivery. We think that it's a good way to get moving and get the automation going. It is capable of doing all of the stages of delivering to production, but it's really, again, about that maturity. So as you move up into premium, this is the next stage of digital transformation. This is where we're going to have customers that have automated their testing, at least to a degree, and their builds, but they're realizing we want to automate now the process into operations. And then we also want to, we're having success, so we want to spread this out to more teams or to more projects. And then optimizing is for those guys that are looking for the highest business velocity. They've got all this down. And so let's ask, should every organization start at starter? And the answer is no. You may have some organizations that are just picking up DevOps, or the concept of agile and software delivery, and they're small or large, but they're ready to go fast. You can talk to them and they say, absolutely, our goal is by the end of this year, for example, we will be delivering software into production, right? It makes sense to start them at premium. There may be an organization which is very sensitive to security, even if they're getting going with automation, and it may be logical to start them at Ultimate. Some organizations may be very large and may be just starting and make sense on starter. Others may be very small, but very advanced in their DevOps maturity levels. So you have to listen to where they're at and figure that out. So again, looking at the maturity and the company culture, the people, the process, the tools, where they're at is going to help determine that. So some steps for adopting. How do we see customers sometimes moving through these maturity levels? As you see by the size of the arrows there, we expect that a lot of people will come from starter, move to premium, and it'll thin out. Less organizations may go to ultimate ultimately. But most will start with a merge request. So for example, if many organizations will start with source code management and merge requests, and for them that will be good. They'll get good value out of it. And then they may spread out and say, oh, there's CI here, CI/CD. This is automating that next process would be good to do, and move into that to be able to automatically create their own pipelines, not relying on Jenkins. So they may start with GitLab for source code management and say this is good, and we have organizations that start with Jenkins. That's where they were. That's where they're at. They look at that and say this makes sense. They use Jenkins on top of GitLab, and then as they start using it more and more, they find out that it doesn't meet their needs, and they find out that GitLab has CI/CD built in, and that it's very usable and actually very fluid, and so they may move up to that. As we go beyond that, organizations may start to need more support and availability as they have more and more teams that are using GitLab, as they have more and more teams that are relying on the processes of software development that are happening through the system. And so as that happens, it's important to make sure that the system is up no matter what. You have things like geo-replication and high availability, and there may be a need for more support. And then eventually they get to a point where they're starting to look at doing things like other tests, security testing further left in the process, again, as they mature. And so this might be the next piece that you hear them talking about at this level, that brings them into the ultimate area. So this is a very dense slide. Again, these will be available for you, so you don't need to jot all this down. But this is a pretty good rundown of where we are and where we're heading with regards to these tiers. So in Starter, we can see that you have kind of basic functionality, code quality. There's LDAP, it's basic LDAP. There's issue weights, burn down charts, things like that for the organization that's kind of getting going with automating their processes, making sure that from inception of idea to output from development, that they can do that consistently. And this includes build, and this includes auto test, so the CI. And then moving from there into premium, we can see that this is about scaling up, like I mentioned, right? It has high availability support, geo redundancy for distributing the code as you get more and more organizations involved, group boards for working across more of the organization, but being able to see all together the issues that you're working on. Now, this is also, as I mentioned, where we get into deployment, where we're going into the operations space out of just the development, the repeated cycles in development. Now we're delivering. And the part of that delivery, a big part of that is the ability to deploy and track that with deploy boards. So there's such functionalities as canary of advanced deployments, like canary deployments. You can deploy with Starter. Certainly, you can write a script that pushes code out to a system. But at premium level, the organization is starting to realize, look, we need to do some more advanced deployments, right? Before, I maybe hooked up to one Kubernetes cluster and that was my testing. But now I want multiple Kubernetes clusters because I want to have different clusters for my testing and my production, for example. So we have the ability to have multiple Kubernetes clusters. Some of the things that are coming, load and performance tests, binary repository. So these are things helping to scale out and helping to scale out the delivery into production. And then at the ultimate level, we're looking at a lot of security scanning to get, again, that constraint of security moving left in the process. So we have static application security testing, dynamic application security testing. This is dependency scanning and license management. This is actually license management was just released, very exciting. So being aware of all of the licenses of all the libraries that are being referenced so that you don't adopt a license that is viral and makes your code free or damages what you're providing. We've got great functionalities coming in that area around other security things like the security dashboard, being able to have an overall view of how everything is moving across your projects through security. But this is also about increasing the velocity around the planning phase. So we have epics and roadmaps, the ability to see where you're going, because as you move faster, right, optimizing is moving faster and better through the process. And as you do that, you need to have the view further ahead. If you're driving, the faster you go, the further out your view needs to be, so you can make sure you're not going to crash. Because as you move fast, you cover ground, close ground more quickly. And so, visibility of where the organization is going. If you've reached the ultimate or the optimized stage, your organization is now moving at a pretty fast pace with delivery, and so knowing where you're heading is an important piece. Other things like tracing, feature flags also help with controlling that speed. And now notice it is optimizing. I was going to point this out earlier. It's not optimized, right? Because in the maturity model, and as we think about it, once you're reaching this stage, you're still continually improving, right? This is continual improvement across all stages, all organizations. So it's continuing to optimize, where there's not a nirvana state that you reach here. So here are the prices. This hasn't changed from previous. $4 per user per month for starter. This is for self-hosted. $19 per user per month for premium. $99 per user per month for ultimate. And we've updated on the website to reflect this maturity model. For example, in starter, this is for organizations starting to adopt DevOps, focusing on automating the build and test, et cetera. So also is the something I had mentioned earlier, which is the level of support that they get. At starter, it's next business day. As you're starting to scale out, you need better support. It's 4-hour support response. And then with ultimate, as you're really optimizing, it's still a 4-hour response, but you also have a TAM, technical account manager, to work with. So a different view, a little more direct view of what is the value, right? Because we said we wanted to do this, have the tiers be value-based. So the starter tier, the value that we see the customer getting out of this: enhanced project management, built-in code quality scanning, code change approval, so the MRs and being able to track and control when something gets merged. Again, the base LDAP integration and next business day support. At the premium level, Again, we're adding disaster recovery and high availability. We have visibility across the pipeline, geographic replication, more advanced deployment capabilities. Also, I didn't mention is browser performance testing in there. So as we deploy, a little bit of extra monitoring to make sure that what we're putting out there doesn't affect the experience of our customers. This has the service desk capability in there and a faster response on support from us. And an ultimate enterprise portfolio management, and there's more coming in the feature-wise in that. We have all of the automated code and security scanning, so this is a big thing here. A good area that a lot of folks are looking at. How do I get security scanning? Even if it's all the way left as a first pass, it's much more valuable than if we're only doing it at the end of the cycle. So that includes dependency scanning, container scanning, because now we're doing deployments, and so we have now an environment that we need to worry about as well, and that's the container that we're putting our application into. So we want to scan that and make sure that that's secure as well. We've also got better monitoring of Kubernetes. So as we connect Kubernetes up, now our auto monitoring is also watching that cluster. So you have the complete picture when the application is deployed, how not just the code, but also the environment it's running in is doing. License management as well. A lot of great stuff here. Okay, with that, I think we'll do some Q&A. We'd love to hear your thoughts and your questions. We'll have a few here, just kind of to kick it off. While I answer those, hopefully you'll get jarred and think about some questions that you have. So as an example, one question that we hear commonly, so what's the difference between the SaaS and the self-hosted plan? So you'll notice I put up the pricing for the self-hosted, but not the SaaS plans. The pricing's the same. We work hard to keep those pretty even. The difference between the SaaS and self-hosted, of course, SaaS is our offering where we're managing the GitLab instance, we're scaling, we're providing the infrastructure. The self-hosted you can take and put behind your firewall, and you administer it, or your customer administers it. Also different is that with SaaS, for that price, the customer gets a certain number of CI minutes, 2,000, I think it is in the starter, and it goes up from there, that they get for that price. And so this is on our shared runners. So they can connect out to their own runners, but for the shared runners, they have a number of those. Other than that, feature-wise, they're pretty much on par. Again, although the one difference on SaaS as well is that you don't have access to all of the administrative capabilities because we're administering it. So setting up geo replication and HA logically, something that we do, so you don't have access to that if you're doing the SaaS model. So hosted, you can define how you want that to be. Where do I get more information about these plans? So on our website, under pricing, there's lots of detail there, and you can drill down. That is the best place to do that. It's also in our handbook, as everything is, and these slides will go out as well in the reseller channel. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Vivian to read out any questions that are coming in.
Great, thank you, Dan. Right now, we don't have any questions that have come in, but I did want to go over a few things. If you are not a member of our Slack channel, please email me. I just posted it into the chat box. Our reseller Slack channel is where we will be posting all activities going on in terms of events, new collateral, all kinds of reseller communications. So please email me if you are not a member. And while we're waiting here, if we have any questions, just wanted to also let everybody know that we are launching a sales enablement program, and this is one of those sessions. We plan to hold monthly sales enablement sessions on a variety of topics. So again, if you're not in the Slack reseller channel, please email me. We'll get you added to keep you current on everything that we're doing to help support all your efforts. I don't think the only question we got was if this was going to be recorded, and the answer is yes. And we actually have a landing page that we will be sending you where you can forward on to your colleagues, and this session along with others will be included. And with that, I think we are about ready to close the session. No questions have come in. Thank you, Dan, so much for your great presentation, and we look forward to presenting some additional content to all our resellers shortly. You can conclude the call now. Thank you.
Thank you all.